Okay, hello to everyone. Many thanks for joining us today. We now start our webinar, Open Science and Open Government in Ukraine, applying Open4UA project recommendations. And I'm glad to see many people in Zoom, and I hope that even more will join us in our live stream on Facebook. My name is Alexander Beresko. I am the Open4UA project coordinator, and today we will discuss some aspects of open science, open government, and how these two spheres, these two concepts can be mutually beneficially interconnected. Okay, before proceeding, I would like to invite Grigory Mozulevich, General Director of Directorate of Science Development of the Ministry of Education and Science of Ukraine, to say several words to us to start the meeting. Grigory, please.
Dear colleagues, dear friends, thank you for opportunity at this event. I sent some theses in English, some theses in Ukrainian. Open science is one of the priority direction of Ukrainian policy in science and innovation sphere. This week is the week of open government in Ukraine, in all world, and we have some event about science policy and many event about other policies in Ukraine. Далі перейду на українську. Декілька слів. Олександр за потреби мене перекладе для наших.
I will translate.
Наш уряд у 21-му році, у 22-23 році працював над оновленням нової програми «Відкритий уряд», в якій містить окремий розділ, що стосується саме відкритої науки.
In 2022-2023, Ukrainian government was working on updating its open government policy, particularly on inclusion of open science.
Міжнародні партнери, які допомагали запустити цю програму в той момент, навіть сумнівались, чи вдасться в рамках війни Україні залишатись відкритою для збереження стійкості системи управління.
Our international partners had lots of doubts if Ukraine can maintain this open approach during the war.
Тим не менш, після довгих дискусій, важких дискусій, нам вдалося затвердити цей перелік задач, в тому числі, які містять задачі освіти і науки.
Despite that, Ukrainian government managed to approve a list of related tasks, particularly related to science and education.
І ми маємо виконати протягом 23-24 року, по суті, десь з десяток завдань, які стосуються безпосередньо 6 конкретних кроків в сфері відкритої науки.
And in the next several years, we need to implement very specific 6 steps on open science implementation in Ukraine.
Головним помічником нашого міністерства в цьому сенсі є проект Open4UA, який ми спільно виконуємо з цілим рядом наукових установ та закладів вищої освіти, який розпочав цей шлях в кінці минулого року. Ну і сподіваюся, який привнесе багато важливих пропозицій для того, щоб здійснити безпосередні завдання уряду.
One of the main assistants of Ukrainian government in this regard is the Open4UA project consortium, which has started last year and already made some nice steps in this direction. So we hope that together we will be able to introduce everything in our best, let's say, what is possible.
Я зараз згадаю тільки 2 найактивніших, найважливіших процеси, що стосуються політик. Ще дуже багато чого попереду. Перше, це ми спільно з проєктом розробили методику атестації наукових установ та закладів вищої освіти. Зараз закінчився процес її громадського обговорення, і ми маємо близько 500 сторінок різних пропозицій.
One of the main outputs of our common work is the new methodology of research assessment in Ukraine based on COAR principles and open science principles. And this was developed together with the Open4UA project consortium. And what is important that, let's say, according to Ukrainian, let's say, procedures and rules, we will have this public discussion when everyone interested, like members of Ukrainian academic community, stakeholders, whoever else, can contribute. And we now have 500 pages of comments on this methodology.
Сподіваюся, що ми найближчим часом зможемо узагальнити цю всю інформацію і знову спільно з нашою робочою групою допрацювати цей документ і розпочати його погодження на рівні уряду.
I hope that very soon we will be able to process this huge amount of comments together with our working group and apply and actually have our new methodology approved by Ukrainian government.
І друга важлива задача, за якою я хотів зараз згадати, це розбудова нового законодавства, євроінтеграційного законодавства, що стосується питань відкритої науки.
And also another thing is development of new legislation in Ukraine, which has to implement open science on different levels. And it's quite a challenge because this has to be done at, let's say, national level.
Тож, я вважаю, що цей захід допоможе нам також відкрити наше розуміння тих чи інших принципів відкритої науки, можливості їх реалізації, адаптації і таке інше. І запрошую приєднатись активно до розробки цього закону.
Also, I hope that our today's event will contribute as well to the process and to the work we are doing. And I invite everyone to join us in this process. Many thanks, Grigory, for such an inspirational words. And indeed, many things have already been done, but many things are still on our to-do list. And okay, so many thanks, and let's now actually move forward to our schedule. So, one second. I hope you can see my screen. Yes, okay. So, as I said, today is the webinar, Open Science and Open Government in Ukraine, which is jointly organized by the Minister of Open Science of Ukraine and the Open4UA project consortium within the frames of the Open Government Week. Our program for today is quick introduction from me, and then we will have our presentations from our speakers, and let me briefly introduce them. First, our speaker is Marine Dacos, who is National Open Science Coordinator at the French Ministry of Higher Education and Research. Marine is a seasoned expert, of course, on open science and related things, and he was the founding director of Open Edition, a scholarly infrastructure dedicated to open access publications in human and social sciences. After that, he was responsible for two national open science plans in France, and he was also I believe one of the co-founders of CONOSC, as the Council of National Open Science Coordination. And I have a pleasure to say that Ukraine is also a member of CONOSC. And Grigory and me are also, let's say, members and also participate in this very important initiative in Europe and beyond. All right. Also, we have another speaker, Sebastian Dahle, who is our colleague from the University of Ljubljana. Also, Sebastian is president of EuroDoc, the European Council of Doctoral Candidates and Junior Researchers, and he is quite active in many projects which aim to implement open science at various stages. For instance, he is representing EuroDoc in the Opus project, which is quite an important project, developing a research assessment framework, let's say, inspired by open science principles. And also today we will have Georgy Vasilyev from Kyiv Polytechnic Institute in Ukraine, who is institutional coordinator of open science, Open4UA project in his institution. And let me tell you that this university, Kyiv Igor Sikorsky Kyiv Polytechnic Institute, is the first organization in Ukraine, first university in Ukraine, which adopted institutional open science policy. So today we have quite interesting bunch of speakers. And let me very briefly introduce the topic to all of us so we can move forward. So open science has many definitions, but I like this one. It's transparent and accessible knowledge that is shared and developed through collaborative networks. And of course, it's not like a single concept. Open science is a huge umbrella term. And by the way, I very much like this taxonomy from the Foster project, but today we of course can extend it in many cases, but still it's good. Also, open science can be practiced not only at the publication level, let's say, but on the whole research life cycle. And open science has many different benefits, right? I can name them quite for a long time, but let's move to the focus of our discussion. For instance, open science was super beneficial for combating COVID-19 and other societal crises all over the world. And it is recognized as well in many countries, not only in Europe, of course. And in the context of Ukraine, the full implementation of UNESCO recommendations of open science is crucial for supporting research communities affected by the war, of course. And we acknowledge that and try to do that to the much extent as we can. Open government is a concept of governments or a governing doctrine which maintains that citizens have the right to access the documents and proceedings of the government to allow for effective public oversight. And OECD defines it as a culture of governments that promotes the principles of transparency, integrity, accountability, and stakeholders' participation in support of democracy and inclusive growth. So already now we understand that open government concept and open science have much things in common, right? And as far as I know, European Union has no formal definition of open government at the moment. However, so in let's say in the vision of public services, open government encompasses three core aspects, right? So first is open assets, government data, software, specification and frameworks, etc., that are open so that anyone can freely access, use, modify, and redistribute its content with no or limited restrictions. Open services, digital public services that can be reused by other public administrations or eventually by third parties in order to provide value-added services. And open engagement, opening up the process for public policy making to the whole of society, including civil society, businesses, labor unions, or even individual citizens. As you can see, open science and open government share several common goals, primarily related to transparency, accessibility, and collaboration. To realize them effectively, coordination between their respective communities is necessary. Possible strategies for joining forces include cross-sectoral initiatives, integration of open science policies into government, data sharing and interoperability, capacity building, and public engagement in such initiatives. By aligning their efforts and working together, open government and open science advocates can maximize their impact and contribute to a more transparent, inclusive, and capable society. So during our event today, we want to discuss it, asking our panelists the three main questions. Which open science principles and approaches can be effectively implemented within the open government concept? As open as possible, as close as necessary. This is, let's say, one of the statements introduced by a very famous European Union document, right? So where is the red line in the open government now, especially given all the circumstances in the world we are living today? And how openness in science and state administration can help nations survive crises such as wars, pandemics, and climate change. So 2 words about our project Open4UA. It is Erasmus Plus EU-funded project. So the main project objective is promoting the growth of Ukraine's knowledge economy for post-war recovery by reforming the higher education system to prioritize open science at the national, institutional, and individual levels. And we are directly focused on the implementation of the task number 5 of the National Open Science Plan in Ukraine. Right. So that's the photo of our kickoff meeting at the ministry. So you can see that we have strong government support, and we hope that our outputs will be implemented as they should be at the national level and other levels in Ukraine. All right. Without further ado, I want to invite our first speaker, Marin Dakos, to deliver his presentation. Marin, please.
Hi, everybody. So do you see my screen? Do you hear my voice correctly?
Yes, everything fine. Please proceed.
Perfect. So if there is any issue, please do not hesitate to interrupt me. So thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure and an honor for me to be invited by Ukrainian country. We are very impressed by your capacity to resist to the war, and we are very impressed that you continue your open science policy in this difficult time. So I would present a short note about the French vision on open science, and to be explicit, just for the beginning, for us, it's a clear contribution to open government. As you know, Open Government as an organization, which is the Open Government Partnership, or GP, and we have involved the Open Science Plan into the Open Government commitments, France. So as it has been already said, I will be quick because you have already known that. Open science is open methodology, material, and results, and not only open access to results. So it's a very broad concept, including the sharing of negative results, which is a very important topic, but I will not have the time today to present it. As you know, open science policies are now very common at the UNESCO level, European level, American states level. And in Europe, you have there a map of the CONOSC organization, which is, as Alexander says, European coordination of the National Open Science Coordinator, and Ukraine is a member of this small organization. And I want to introduce the reason why we developed open science policies in France and in Europe for a decade now. So the first reason is that it's principle, it's public money. It's state paying the researchers, so the data should be public. We have also a scientific reason to do open science because we consider that closed research is of lower quality than open research, because there is the openness is a very good opportunity to improve the quality of research. And there is also a reason for society, which is close to the question of open government. Open science is more accessible to society than closed science, so it's very important for us to rely on these three pillars. So if I want to be a bit more precise about the reason why we develop open science policies, I would introduce these different aspects. The first one is the impact. We have more citations, more readers when we are open than closed. It's more efficient on the budgetary and economic side because open science is in a small investment given the cost of the whole research process. It's a very major contribution to reproducibility. Open science is a major contribution to reproducibility. It's also an approach where we avoid duplicate efforts and we develop more cumulative science, and we lead to more discoveries, and it's the reason why we say open science is more heuristic. And it's a major contribution to ethic, integrity, and transparency that we are asked to by the society. And on the last topic is that the primary beneficiary of open science is the researcher himself or herself, because we know a lot of stories of people or researchers having lost their data because it didn't take care of it. If it's open in a good quality repository for long-term preservation, then 20 years later, you can go back to your own data, which is already something. First, we have the proof that we have more readers and more citations when we are open than closed. So it's a number of visits in Open Edition, the platform I have created 25 years ago. This platform dedicated to open science and humanities has received in 2021 more than 100 million visits a year, which is very impressive given the small size of humanities and social sciences, and given the fact that it's mainly in French. And we have more and more research showing that open access research articles receive more diverse citations, not only more citations, but more diverse citations coming from places where we do not expect citations, different disciplines, different language, different regions of the world. We have also some reason to think that open data is linked to higher citation for journal articles. There is a huge research about medical science showing that there is an added value of 25% more citations when an article has supplementary data linked to the article itself. We also know that open access is impactful beyond universities, beyond research performing organizations. This is a research led on Open Edition, and we see that we have detected the usage of banks, media companies, publishing companies, aviation, and many other private bodies using this platform because it's open access. And this is the reason why we launched the second plan for open science in 2021 at the higher level, because it was presented by the Minister for Higher Education, Research and Innovation at the time, exactly like the first plan, which was in 2018. And it was officially a contribution to the French Open Government Partnership commitments. So for us, open government and open science is not the same, but it's highly connected. So just a few highlights on some topics. The first one is open access to publications. We are quite happy to see that there is a rise between the start of the plan, where we had 38% of open access, to now where we have 65% of open access to our publications, which is very interesting. But I want to say that some publishers have decided to toggle from subscription to APCs, so publication fees, and this is very, very expensive. So it is the increase of APC's cost at national level in France, coming from 9 million to 30 million in 10 years, and we expect it to increase a lot. So it's not affordable. In fact, it's not realistic to rely on this type of model, the APC model. It's the reason why we support more bibliodiversity, more diverse approaches of publishing. One of them is Diamond Open Access, where you don't have to pay to read, but you don't have to pay to publish. And it's not only a topic of budget, of money, it's also a topic of equity. Researchers don't have the same budgets in different regions, in different countries, in different disciplines, in different universities. So it's very dangerous to build a whole ecosystem only based on article processing charges. And we have also, as probably your country has, also decided to invest also in what we call the Green Road, which is open access repositories, and we have national open access repositories for publication, which is called AL, which has more than 1 million articles free to download online. Given the topic of open and fair data, we have a legal context, which is the Digital Republic Law of 2016, that is saying that open data is now mandatory for all public bodies. It's mandatory by the law. It's a principle of openness by default for all data coming from the administration. But unfortunately, when we have a look to the figures, and we have built a strong initiative called French Open Science Monitor to know where we are at open access, open data, and so on. And we have produced 2 new indicators, which are completely innovative at worldwide level, because no country has never been able to build this kind of indicators, showing that only 22% of our research data are open, and only 19% of our research software are open, which shows that we have many more efforts to do to achieve the project. And if I go back to the worldwide vision, let's say for COVID-19, everybody said that open science is a success during the COVID-19 crisis. And I'm not convinced that it's true. It's true for open access to publications, but it's not true for open access to data. And there are many research showing that, contrary to what many have suggested, a global pandemic is not sufficient to radically modify scientific practices and to develop a generalization of open data. The same for what we call data sharing statement. Research has been done on many papers saying that just request for the data, you will receive them. And in fact, only 6.5% of the researchers provided the requested data. So it's a worldwide indicator showing that we are far from achieving 100% of transparency. So in France, not only having a law, we decided to create an ecosystem for sharing and opening research data, which is called Recherche Data Gouv, which is an ecosystem dedicated to providing not only a repository, but also data competence centers in proximity to researchers inside the different universities. It's very important for us not to provide only technical platforms, but also to provide help and human resources for data sharing, which is very complex. And as has been said by the government ministerial representative from Ukraine, the research assessment system is probably part of the problem and probably part of the solution. Today we know that if people don't share that much negative results in medical science, in clinical trials, or data about connected to their publications, it's probably because there is no incentive doing that. So at European level, when France was sharing the European Council, we proposed and negotiated with the 27 countries European conclusions on open science. And one of them, there were three topics in the proposal, in the public statement coming after the negotiation inside the 27 governments. We proposed a reform of research assessment systems, capacity building for academic publication, and the promotion of multilingualism. And you see that with it was of higher interest to say we need to reform the research assessment system. And then came COARA, the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment, as has been already said by my colleague, and we support the COARA movement. I don't have time to be more precise, but we need to incentivize more openness in the research assessment system. Saying that, we have also some smaller but interesting initiative, which is valuing good open science practices by awarding people doing that. So we are creating open science awards. The first one was about open science award for research data. The second one has been open science for research software. And this year we are starting the new open science award for PhDs. So we will keep these three different awards each year to stimulate and to improve it and to recognize the good practices. Thank you very much. I'm completely open to discussion by definition. I'm very happy to be with you today.
Many thanks, Marian. Dear colleagues, I suggest that we probably proceed to our next presentations. Oh, okay, if there are some quick questions to Marian, right? So please raise your hand. If not, we will. Okay, so that's a question from Anna Etzishin in the chat. So that's a question like this. Mine, what is your personal opinion regarding open review of scientific publications, open review of research reports?
Okay, I think so. It's a question of open peer review. It's an interesting question, but we should not commit too far in this topic. It's far more complex than opening only the publication of the data. We know that there are power inside the reviewing system, so it's very complex. So I recommend experimentations, not generalization of open peer review. We need to be very cautious about this. It's not a miracle to our issues. So we need to experiment, not to make it mandatory. It would be a strong mistake to do that.
Many thanks. Are there any other questions to Marian? Like quick questions. You will be, of course, able to ask other questions in the end, right? All right. Then, Marian, just quick question from myself. Just quick glimpse, like in general, what do you think is the main, where lies the main potential in implementing open science principles to open government concept? So what is the main most valuable connection between these two concepts, in your opinion?
The connection is that it's transparency for both, and it's a way to say administration should be accountable to the citizen, which is the principles of the French Revolution. When we say the French human rights declarations, I think the Article 15 was administration should be accountable. So it's the principle exactly the same for open government and for open science. So I would say also that open data is a principle for both. And maybe you will be interested in knowing that France has decided to open up the court rulings, the decisions just has been made public. Of course, you need to process it, it's complex, you need to anonymize it and so on, but it's now in open data. It's not research, but it's the same principles. So these two initiatives can drive in hand by hand.
Many thanks. One last question, probably very quick. So I know that you were responsible or just contributed to at least two national open science plans in France.
Yeah.
So how many plans after these two will still be needed?
So yeah, I was the main person in charge of this writing of these two plans, and we are thinking of the next steps. And we think that we don't need any more plans, we need a strategy. So we have made strong changes, and now we need to embed it in the long run. So it will be a different cycle, but it's not finished. You don't transform closed science to open science in 6 years. So it's only the beginning. So we need by sure to go further and to implement new policies in the future.
I see. Okay, dear all, many thanks to Marian. Let's okay, so let's introduce our next speaker. Sebastian, are you with us now?
Yes, all the time.
Very good. Sebastian Dahle, our colleague from University of Ljubljana and the president of EURODOC, the European Council of Doctoral Candidates and Junior Researchers. Please, Sebastian.
Thank you very much for the invitation, for the kind introduction. So I'm happy to give a little bit of an overview of outcomes from our project that Alexander already taught us about, and to relate this also to the open government concept for the discussion today. Very quickly for the agenda, for those 20-25 minutes that we have for the presentation, I'm gonna provide a few more details on the Open4UA project so that we get the background. Since you already know it's going to be about the recommendations that we're implementing then together with our Ukrainian partners within the Open4UA project. So the first thing is the methodology. How did we get to those recommendations? One particular part that we are then going to look into is a mapping and analysis. How does it currently look like if we make recommendations for changing something? And of course, the status quo is very important. Take a quick overview about the recommendations. This is, of course, going to be very brief because the recommendations are quite lengthy, are quite detailed, and we won't have the opportunity to go into all of them in all the detail, but at least to give to get a good impression. And after that, we're gonna try and see how does this relate to the open government concept. How does this work together? Where are the differences, or what can we learn for the one, for the other, and vice versa. So let's start with the Open4UA project. And as you already heard, the main goal, of course, is to promote the growth of the Ukrainian knowledge economy. And again, just to revert back, we have quite a number of partners contributing. So a lot of different universities, research institutions, but also funder and ministry from Ukraine. And we also have a few international partners who provide insights and provide their best practices, their experiences to make this work out in the best possible way. And so this promotion of the growth of the Ukrainian knowledge economy, this in a way in the course of the project breaks down into three big objectives. One is fostering the national reform on open science, and then also including the research assessment for the Ukrainian higher education system modernization and for the EU integration. So in this whole context, so that this is going to be also adapted, but of course, as Alexander already said, adapted in an orchestrated national consensus. So not just that some few people coming from the outside and tell everyone what to do, quite on the contrary, just some few people providing experiences, insights, and then all together, you who are actually the matter of this and who are relating to this are together developing with the project the actual outcomes. Of course, another objective then is to introduce existing approaches, particularly rely on what's already there, and not just reinvent the wheel. This is one part of this, of course, is the recommendations that we're going to look at, mechanisms also to do these kind of reforms, again, regarding open science, regarding research assessment. As we heard, both of them are to a large degree also linked, and to also make sure that open science really is prioritized at the national level. And then at the very end, of course, it's not just about reforms of some regulations or of some paperwork, but it's really about a change of the research culture to make it more worthwhile, to make the knowledge economy really grow better and be integrated better in the whole European research area, but overall be more effective and be really fit for the future. And so this is, of course, something that requires the researchers, the institutions, and to make this all go along very well. The outcomes then will be toolkits that will really help bring this about and make this all a worthwhile experience. And so in a little bit more detail, what I already went through. So we are still relatively at the beginning of this project as well, since we have already just now prepared the recommendations based on the process of knowledge transfer and the status quo. And the next parts, of course, will be legislation, national interventions, and then the development of the toolkit that I explained. Just to recap a little bit, we heard already open science, it's not just open access to publications, and attached to this a little bit about open data. Open science is a huge and a growing ecosystem. And of course, behind this is not just a blind following of some kind of term that someone did put up, but really what's behind this is, of course, that we need to improve upon the way how we do science. So we need to make sure that any research is reproducible and reusable. So if I publish any research and nobody can really check if this is correct, if what I did was scientifically holding true, is the methods are being done all right, and the outcomes, what I'm claiming in the conclusions, are actually correct. If nobody can really test this, can really check this, well, then very frankly, that's not science, right? So reproducibility and also the opportunity then to reuse it in a proper way is a big topic that's just inherent to science. So in a way, open science really just means good science. And connected to this, of course, is then it's not just the opportunity that things are there and are able to be reused, but also that they are actually being put to use and that they are available to a wide range of communities. So it's good if a very narrow field-based community in science can find and use the research. It's much better if it's really available to everyone. And also it's very straightforward. The majority of the research is publicly funded, so the public has quite an invested interest to actually be able and take a look at what's happening with the money and how they can use it. And not just how they can use it, but citizen science is becoming a more and more important topic. On one hand side, for some kinds of science that actually rely on citizens to be part of this, otherwise it wouldn't work. But also in terms of this whole rationale. And so these are general principles that are behind this. If we put it briefly, it's about transparency, it's about integrity, about accountability, and about participation. And as we heard already, a big factor about with all how we do science, how we do research, is of course the way how we assess research. There can be some particular practices that are very much incentivized by research assessment. Currently, we are very much relying on individual article publications. And so, of course, what we're seeing is, since we are everywhere where research is assessed, currently are mainly counting the articles, we see the number of articles rising. If this is more or less impactful, it's a different story, right? So, of course, assessment has a direct impact on how we do our research and on the culture as such. And as such, it's not just something that's not incentivizing open science, but there's even occasions where the current ways of assessing research are disincentivizing open science practices, are actually encouraging researchers to keep their results closed in order to be more competitive against others. And these kind of unfortunate parts in the assessment, unintended, but factually there, of course, these need to be overcome. So the question is how to do better research assessment. We already heard quite a lot from our previous speaker. And of course, this is something that's not just some individual research groups here or there in France or in the Netherlands or maybe in Slovenia are talking about, or in Ukraine. It's something that's happening worldwide. As we are seeing, there's the San Francisco Declaration that's outlining a lot of fundamental principles, what needs to be done to improve research assessment. There's the big movement on the European continent, or spearheaded on the European continent, that's the Coalition for Advancing Research Assessment, COARE. There's really good also materials being produced, what kind of principles, what kind of processes should be used, which should not be used, for what reasons, how should it look like. So on the high level, there's already a lot of things that are being developed. And as said in the beginning, of course, we don't want to reinvent the wheel. We want to use something that's proven useful. And so these are some examples just given here. So this is, of course, then all the background that went into the project. And in order to get recommendations and get forward also for the Ukraine knowledge economy, the first step was to see, well, what is already being done and what is already going well. So a lot of things are being done, of course, in the Netherlands. And so we had one knowledge transfer workshop at University Delft with participants from all over the Netherlands to really show what's going on there. We had a follow-up workshop in Grassroots where other things have been presented. In the third workshop in Ljubljana, all of them essentially touched on the entirety of open science and on a wide range of research assessment parts. But all of them also had their specialties that they focused more on than the other workshops, and where they have more insights to provide than the others may have. And so this is outlined on the slides. So particularly in Netherlands, one big topic that was very predominant, of course, is how is this with the communities? How is this done from the grassroots level? The workshop in Grassroots was a lot focusing also on the integration, the implementation, how is this on the institutional level, how does this come together? In Ljubljana, we discussed a lot about legislation, about policy, about infrastructure, how this fosters all the other things that we've done. And so with all these different workshops, many speakers from different institutions, different levels, different countries coming together, really a lot of good practices have been shared, a lot of experiences have been shared. And these went then into the further process. And then the next step, of course, also was to see, well, what's actually the situation now in Ukraine, now that we understand what others are doing. So we underwent an exercise of open science and research assessment mapping, where all the project partners in the Open4UA project provided insights, so that we can see what's the, or could see what's the current situation, with a lot of really interesting insights. Even some partners, when did the discussions related to this and really dig into the details, what we found is that some Ukrainian universities even started rolling back on open science because they were adapting now these more dated or currently being overhauled kind of practices of research assessment that Western Europe is using. So by adapting to the Western European system that's currently being reformed, actually some good practices were being started to be rolled back already. That's something, of course, that we want to help that it's not happening anymore, but that we really stick to good practices that are already there. Just as one anecdotal kind of side note. And based on all these 4 parts, of course, then we went through the co-creation process to get to the first version of the recommendation. So if you look into the mapping, this started with just some very concise questionnaires to see about what's happening actually at the different institutions. Are there any strategies or action plans on the like policy, regulation, or strategy kind of level? Are there any mandates, anything that you're forcing your researchers or your staff members to do? And are there any training, supportive measures, or other kind of things that are already happening? And on the other hand side, for the research assessment part, again, this was linking very strongly to different of these in the international initiatives, or different of these principles. How far are we there? And was then summarized down to relatively brief overview. First to see, well, how far are we there? Are we already implementing this? Are we already very advanced with this? Are we partially implementing those kind of things, or are we just at the beginning and need to see how we can improve on these things? So none of this is generally good or bad. It's just a mapping of the situation. And as it's called a mapping, of course, then you can see this is a whole distribution across Ukraine with different types of organizations and located in different parts of Ukraine. One thing that's obvious is that open science is already very well established in many ways. There's room for improvements. There's still rooms where practices can be improved, but it's already a very advanced situation where Ukraine is starting from. There's already many things that are there and that are in place, and this is across all of Ukraine. So, in a little bit more detail in the table, so you can see really, there's many advanced and many and some intermediate players in the current status. So a lot of things that are already happening. If you go forward with the research assessment, it seems to look more negative. Well, not actually negative, just there's a lot of things that have been developed that have not yet been so much included at many of the Ukrainian institutions and organizations. So there's just a situation where some adaptations might be useful to go. And this is what's been visible, what is visible here. So as mentioned before, particularly touching on those existing kind of principles, initiatives, and then going into detail what's already happening at the institutions. And here we also see that particularly the organizations located in Kyiv and located more to the western part of Ukraine have already likely been in more exchange with neighboring countries that are already implementing some of these things. So they've been much faster to already start implementing some of those parts, whereas in the eastern part of Ukraine, it seems that other things were, of course, more predominant, and a lot of the recent developments from the last few years have not been as taken up, which is, I think, very understandable given the situation. And as also our previous speaker said, it's just commendable. It's very impressive just how you're continuing despite everything with the full-scale invasion and the war still happening. So despite everything, there already are a lot of things happening. So again, even if there's some red colors in the graphics, take this as a positive thing, not a negative thing. So with this kind of overview and a lot of the practices that we did map out, let's briefly go through the recommendations. generally, the recommendations are happening on different pillars and levels. So this pillar structure, that's a general kind of structure. How does culture change look like? Because as we said in the beginning, it's about good practices, it's about good science, it's about a knowledge economy that's growing and working well. It's not just about some written text on the piece of paper, so it's really about the culture that's being lived. And so for the culture change, there's different kind of models, descriptions, how this can well happen. And that's also what we found in our transfer of knowledge and the reports on the best practices, that really this holds very much true, and that there's different structured pillars, really how these best practices can be grouped by. And so this follows, of course, also then one logic, this 5 pillars approach by Brian Nozick, if anyone's familiar with that. That is not necessary to know this. So just the important part is that all these 5 things need to come together to really be able and get to the desired result. Policies need to be the right ones. Incentives need to be there to really convince people to do the right thing, or to reward really doing the right thing, to reward doing good science, not just working for some abstract numbers. Communities need to really embrace this. Communities need to take this up. And of course, then the user interface, user experience, and the infrastructure that's allowing those kind of practices. These are important parts that all together need to be reformed. And these are, of course, there are at different levels. So some policies, some infrastructures, communities, and so forth are existing on the international level, and that's quite active. So this is something that should be taken into account, should be used. There's a lot of things that should be aligned and should be also then provided on the national level. Not least also if we think about funding, if we think about large infrastructure, there's a lot of things that really need to be addressed on these kind of higher levels. Other things are much more direct interventions, and so these need to be addressed at the institutional level, directly in the local environment, which can or is different between different universities, research institutes, and so forth, and that's a good thing. But also means that things will be somewhat different between different institutions. And so, yeah, a lot of things also then need to happen there. And in the very end, or not in the end, actually in the very beginning, the very basis, all of us are the researchers and are all the people who are in the scientific system, who are in academia and relating to academia to really make this work out. So for a brief summary, as said, the time is of course flying by, so going to all individual points and in detail will not be possible, but to group this together to the recommendations generally on the national level and on the institutional level, and encompass as much as possible of all those learned lessons, best practices, and conclusions. On the national level, there's 3 essential parts that need to be touched upon. Obviously, the legislation need to be properly aligned. So there's some improvements that need to be done. Some we heard are already going on. So the accreditation procedure is already, there's already the consultation process underway, and this is already starting to be implemented. Others are still in development, but generally, of course, this needs to be coherent in the research and innovation activities. Needs to be streamlined like this, and this includes then, of course, explicit regulations on the open science part. For example, also through a second national open science action plan, where the action plan, of course, is just the planning to put the strategy into practice. So this relates together. It's not just individual separated measures as we heard before. The second part on the national level is touching towards quality assurance. And so this is something that's both at the funding agencies and the quality assurance agencies, where things need to be aligned in terms of assessment, where, of course, open access to all kinds of research results and all kinds of outcomes need to be properly aligned. There need to be the proper co-funding instruments there, because a lot of these kind of activities, well, they do require some funds, some money. The majority does pay back in different kind of terms, but this is something at the very beginning. There needs to be some investment into this in order to then benefit. And of course, open science core principles and the fundamental training being systematically integrated into the educational programs. These are, of course, all things that need to happen on the national level to really be well aligned. And then The third part on the national level, as mentioned, is of course relating to infrastructure, and these are best handled in, or other countries at least, best practices are that this works best in specific centers that take care of larger areas of infrastructural needs. And then these kind of infrastructure that of course should somehow include, on the one hand side, connection services such as eduroam, certification services and others such as e-signatures, authentication, AAI, or these kind of parts. Then high performance computing is something that's really well accessible mainly on the national level through national infrastructure or international infrastructure. And of course, one particular thing is also to make use of the European level, to connect to national and regional nodes, or to establish national and regional nodes of existing European infrastructures. So this is a very brief overview, or very blunt overview on all these aspects on the national level, with all of them, of course, being connected to quite a number of different detailed conclusions that are all accessible through our already published deliverable, where these things are described in detail, and the link was on one of the previous slides, is coming up in a second again, so you can also access this and also provide your feedback on that. The second part, of course, is then on the institutional level, and there's a couple of things that need to be done. So from strategies that are being put into action plans and into action practices, to also adherence to European principles like the Charter for Researchers, Code of Conduct for Employment, the European Framework for Research that really provides a tool to make this come to life. A good thing in this context also is to utilize the Human Research Excellence Award, so this whole human research strategy for researchers process. If you go further, then of course there's particular internal acts that need to be updated in such a way that new principles of assessment are being properly taken into account to really make the whole structure of the knowledge economy in Ukrainian academia worthwhile. And here are mentioned some examples that can be well taken into account. Related to this then is for the individual researcher, of course, that it's good to have unique identifiers to properly credit your actual tasks, how you contributed, for example, to publications via something like the credit author taxonomy and other systems to really make things transparent and obvious, rather than in the existing system where it's often not clear who has contributed how much and how this actually should then be credited, recognized, rewarded. With all these things, of course, institutional support and training is absolutely necessary. And also local infrastructures. These can be data centers, these can be digital competence centers, and others, and also data stewards or other support staff who really help with all these are a crucial part. One other learned lesson is that it helps for the institutional implementation still to get together into consortia. For example, if it's about subscriptions of journals and then the negotiations for article processing charges, vouchers, and others, but also for other parts, it can be very helpful to have these kind of larger consortia with a larger impact. So even the institutional implementation can make sense to put on a higher level. And then the final thing, of course, is a lot of experimentation, as we heard already. See what kind of open science communities will work best for you, because they are very different in the different environments that we visited for the transfer of knowledge. Also data ambassadors and other these kind of structures. So yeah, such kind of networks can be super helpful, but it needs to align with your culture, with your way of doing things. And yeah, so that's why experimentation is needed in each place. Oh, this was quick. So then let's go forward as time is really quickly flying by and see, well, how does this all then relate to the open government concept? I've talked a lot about open science, a lot about research assessment, and a lot about, of course, what we did in the project and how the outcomes look like. How does this relate? Well, we talked beforehand about open science being as open as possible, and about the fundamental principles behind open science. And if we recall this, really putting together the reproducibility, reusability in terms of making good science. This is a matter of research integrity. This is a matter of accountability as a scientist. making sure people can reuse what you've put out, to not just do your work to be then stored away in some closet. That's a general principle, and that's of course relating again to the transparency and the participation, even more so with citizen science and all these kind of communication being more and more systematically integrated and rewarded. And these are the same principles and the same values that are also exactly behind the open governance. We already saw the graph. And of course, in all these parts of open governance, we find again sort of the mirror image of what's already also, or what's in parallel happening in academia. So of course, with the open assets, that's the corresponding. So of course, open assets, that's the parallel part to open access to scientific publications and to research data. For example, with the open engagement and partners in society, well, it's something that's just as well happening with citizen science and with a lot of other parts of open science. Open services really relates also to many things happening with open research, with open software, open code hardware. There's a lot of parts happening there just as well. So we see there's a lot of parallels that really, where really open governance is mirroring what's happening in open science. And one thing that's also very similar or very much to be adopted is how to then really assess how those kind of reforms and the implementation of open governance or open government is actually carried out. And here's a roadmap with recommendations from the OECD, which indeed mirrors very much what we see in in many of the recommendations and many of the discussions for the research assessment, where it's of course important not just to evaluate, assess single categories of outputs, as has been often done in the past, but really to take a look at all those different pillars as well. How is the science actually performed? What are the outputs? What are the outcomes? What are the impacts? In all these kind of sections. And so this is something that's just as well being mirrored in the assessment reforms of the scientific and of the scientific systems and of the academic research. So again, this is very much in parallel. One thing, of course, that's much more nuanced in the governmental part is the question, well, as open as possible, as closed as necessary. So where is the red line that we heard about? In many ways, in research, this may be easier. If it's fundamental research, there's nothing hindering from putting this out. If there's GDPR conflicts, well, there's anonymization tools, processes, structures. So this is nothing new. This is something that can be relatively easily be dealt with. If there's any business relation to this, any actual implementation in the economy already, well, then there's ways to protect the intellectual property rights with this, and to make sure that the businesses are being then really using this in the economy. But again, even with the protection of the intellectual property rights, or even more so by publishing a patent about this, applying for a patent that's then being published, things are being made openly available. So it's really not a contrast there. It's something that's much more open. The question, what of course becoming questionable, is anything that's of dual use capability, anything that might be used against us, and particularly in the military sense, but also in a wider sense. And there it's becoming a much more nuanced discussion, but this is limited still in the research world. And the impacts can be in many ways, or in many cases, much more estimated than this might be the case for many of the governmental parts. So here, it's really a matter of good discussion, really a matter of drawing the line, which parts can actually be used so negatively against us that we should not make them open, or which parts bring so much value by making them open that those potential negative impacts actually do not weigh as much, do not come into account as much as the benefits that we're anyway getting out of this. And this is not always obvious, as we see also from all those impacts and all those uses that the open source intelligence community has made. So it's really a whole new world in some way that open science and open governments are accessing. But yeah, really all those provisions. I shortened those 10 general principles or 10 general provisions that the OECD phrased as recommendations on open government. If we take a look at every one of these are exactly aligned with essentially all the things that we are doing. And I see I'm running slowly out of time, so maybe I'm not going to comment on all of them. Some of them seem, I think, fairly straightforward, like the data part to make this available. Others maybe not as much, but yeah, they're just as needed in both ways. Like with the monitoring recommendation, well, of course, we need to see how things are working out, if we're doing things the good way, or if there's needs to improve, or other practices that we have reasonably thought they would have a good impact. The impact didn't come into play, so we need to see what else to do with it. So yeah, all of these, of course, these are very much in parallel and are just two sides of a coin in a way, but are the same kind of approaches. So with that, I thank you very much for the attention. I hope this was a useful presentation, intervention with the results, and with the results from the Open4UA project and the relation then connecting this to the open governance. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Many thanks, Sebastian. Actually, quite a nice and complex presentation, because our recommendations from Open4UA project consortium are also rather complex. So it takes time to even read them at all, right? So that's actually okay. So, dear colleagues, we are now entering the discussion phase, right? And I suggest that we start with commenting on what Sebastian delivered. So if we have another question, before we start the discussion, we have another question from another session. So, Sebastian, regarding the institutional level, has the university carried out scientific research on the implementation of open science tools in the training of specialists in various specialities? Please share your experience, if any.
Yes, so there's quite a lot put into one single sentence. So first of all, thank you for the good question. And I tried to touch on the different points. So there's a lot of things that are happening, and some of them already for a long time at my university, indeed. So there's a lot of implementation of open science that's there, from the requirement of open access to a lot of outputs, including, for example, diploma and doctoral thesis and dissertations. There's some fields that are more advanced and more experienced, some fields that are less advanced or less experienced yet. And that's also something that's very much to expect, that not all research fields and all groups are going to advance in the same kind of speed. And also which practices are to be adopted will, of course, vary a little bit, and how this will be actually implemented. Both will vary between different fields. It's going to be different if I, as a physicist, do something from what social sciences are doing, just because of the nature of the research being so different, right? So that's quite obvious. So this is with the implementation of open science, with tools and training. And yes, tools and training are in place. This is something that's very much extending just now. So some tools have been in place already quite a long time. Some basic level of training has been already quite a while in place. But really a lot of in-depth activities are just currently being implemented through one part of the most recent Open Science Action Plan. So that's also how, again, things relate together. As we heard before, an action plan is not just to put it on the paper then as a isolated element, but is really connecting the strategy to the strategic analysis, what's there and what's still needed, where do we need to have more interventions, how then do we plan these kind of activities, and the funding that's needed for this. And in this case, like implementing a lot of the core training in detail for a lot of these kind of aspects requires efforts, and correspondingly requires some funding. And that's something that is being provided on the national level. So all the higher education institutions came together and are implementing this now together to make this work out in the most useful way. But that's being implemented to more and more deep depth. Scientific research on the implementation, that's for most fields rather limited. There are, to my knowledge, a couple of those things, particularly in the social sciences, who are already for several decades engaging also in terms of the open data management with their own repository and so forth. And they also took a look then, what does this mean? How is this progressing? But for all of the fields, I'm not aware that there's really so much scientific research. How does this kind of implementation of the practices and the tools and the training, how really did this impact the individual researchers? I mean, that's after all what we would look for. And of course, it's something that needs to follow. So it's a good call. But yeah, it's evolving step by step, and that's in all the places.
Many thanks, Sebastian. To be honest, actually, I have just put 2 links in our chat, and that's about Ukrainian, also some like the training on open science in Ukrainian, and it's handbook of an Optima project where Eurodoc is also a partner. So for those interested, you're more than welcome to download and see, and probably we will come up with a final version of this handbook quite quick. So everyone will be able to download and use it. But let's get back to our panel discussion, to be honest. And we already have some very interesting questions from the people who registered to the webinar, right? So we have 3 like official panelists, but after each session, everyone is more than welcome to share their thoughts. So there will be space for this as well. So our first question is, and it's very close connected to what Sebastian has just presented to us. So which open science principles and approaches can be effectively implemented within the open government concept? So today we learned much about open science and interconnection with open government. So in your opinion, because of course open science is open access to various types of research outputs. So which open science principles and approaches can be effectively implemented within the open government concept? I will ask Marian to be the first to reply, please.
Okay, thank you. First, as I already said, I think open and fair data is a major approach, and open source software too, because the software is a way to produce knowledge. So when you have only the data, you don't have the process that has been done on the data to produce knowledge by software, you are lacking something. Maybe I could be a bit more precise about the question of open and closed data, because there are many discussions on this topic. To be completely honest, openness is impossible in many research data as in many public data. It's impossible because it would be illegal, it would be dangerous. So openness is a principle, but the principle is not to be dangerous for the nation, for the security, for the intellectual property, or for the individuals. So, for example, I don't believe that anonymization of the medical information, medical personal data is feasible. It's possible to re-identify in many times the information. So in this case, we implement the sharing principles and the fair principles, not the open principles. It's what we need to do, not to open without any consideration to more different interests. It's in the law, in fact. You cannot harm the security of the nation. So the government is able to say this kind of information should be secured and not shared. So it will never be open, and that's completely okay. So yes, I would say open and fair data, fair meaning findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable data. And when you say fair, you see there is not the term open. The term accessible means that it should be as accessible as possible. So it could be open, the best option. But if it's not open, it could be shared. Shared means it's shared under control approaches. So you share only with trusted people, with a contract saying, okay, you will not propagate the information outside your computer and so on. So there is a distinction between open and fair in this regard.
Thanks so much, Marian. Okay, so probably we'll go now to our speaker who hasn't been speaking yet at this event. So Grigory Vasilyev from Kyiv Polytechnic Institute. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, hello to everyone. Yes, I don't have a presentation, but I've listened to our colleagues, Marin and Sebastian, and also about some things in common with open government and open science. I'd like to mention that there is, like for general public, there is quite a big problem to understand what scientists do in their laboratories and what they output. So I think that some ideas of open science in that idea that the results are easily accessible by the general public is a good thing, where people can understand where their taxes go for and what the results are presented by the scientific community. And also it is needed to understand better how the people in the country can influence the scientific policies. And for example, they may participate in some researchers, and also they can provide their feedback to the government by changing the directions of what to investigate, because they see how their money goes to the I don't know, some institutions, some researchers, and what the results they produce. So this is the way how the public can influence where the science goes, and also participate in utilization the results. Like they can take part in some citizen science, for example, and also may suggest some ideas. So I think this type of communication between the people and the researchers that are made through open science can then move forward to some open government. So this is the idea.
Many thanks, Georgi and Sebastian. Last but not least, but because you were speaking actually as the first and introducing the last presentation, so please, your thoughts.
Yes. So indeed, there's a lot of principles and approaches that can be just directly implemented in similar ways, I think, on both sides. So one thing, of course, we already heard is if you think about open source. So seeing on the one hand side, a lot of the open source software that's on the one hand side used in academia, but also open source software that maybe we privately use. Open source delivers a lot of benefits, but also in the private world, we can see that open source software has not necessarily taken over to lead the world, right? So there's a lot of things where actually open source software that was on an equal level as the commercial one has been sidelined. And there's also good insights available why this is the case. What things went good or went bad with open source software. And so one particular part, of course, there again is open source has the benefit of a community driving this forward and of many people being able to look into this and make this work out. But on the other hand side, of course, what you also need is the proper financing again. You need to have the proper basis so that things do advance, and do advance also beyond just a very small, limited peer group. And so this is the same thing then that we see with successful open source software in science. This is something that's on the one hand side spread vastly between scientists who this relates to, who all benefit and then again in turn also contribute, but also at least in my fields, all the open source software that's become really successful has of course attracted different ways of co-financing, co-funding. So again, these two things need to come together. And that's something that we also then have and see with governance platforms, of course, with these governance assets, not assets, but the platforms, where again, on the one hand side, community contributions to the platform itself can be super good and super worthwhile. On the other hand side, this needs to be effectively managed with the co-financing or the funding from the government, also to avoid otherwise just spending very large amounts of money in a less than effective way, which we also see in a lot of practices across Europe, I would say. I could tell quite some of these examples as a German from my home country. So these comes together very well, and these are again then the same principles and the same approaches that made a lot of the scientific, the academic open source software successful, that also directly apply to the governance. As we heard, for transparency as a basic principle, And then relating to this is, of course, on the one hand side, the communication, similar to the science communication, that needs to be increased so the general public has more insights, more understanding. And also in general, with these things, we heard about the fair terminology. So mainly this is used for the data being findable and accessible and interoperable and reusable, but that's generally for all these things. The same needs to then also hold true for the governance processes, for the ways these are handled. And in the same way that these need to be findable and accessible and everything, not all parts of this need to be open. Quite on the contrary, as we heard, a lot of the parts of this cannot be open, which does not mean it's not fair, it's not findable, it's not accessible. But we need to have a really good vetting process in terms of what's being made open and what not. And that's something that's developing in the academic world to some degree. So particularly like speaking about the dual use kind of research, there things are very much developing just how to best vet this and how to best manage these kind of things. There's some good practices, but a lot of ongoing developments. And the last part, of course, is with the participation. This is the same on both sides. On the one hand side, we see this big expansion of citizen science, which is super worthwhile to both sides and in many ways. But then also citizen science, of course, has the very necessary part of being science. So a lot of participation of the citizens, but the point is still that all that's happening holds true to the scientific principle and the scientific method. And in the very same way, democracy is something that absolutely requires the participation and the active citizens to really contribute to this. Without the citizens, there cannot be a democracy, right? But also then again, all these kind of participations, the more you open this up, of course, this also needs to be based in the principles of democracy. So this, again, is very, very similar to make sure things are happening in the right way. So this can be very well adopted from the one hand side to the other.
Yes, thanks, Sebastian. And actually, we are now approaching another interesting concept and relation between democracy itself, right, and openness. All right, dear colleagues, but before we proceed, do we have any questions from our community online? So I encourage all of you to post the questions or raise your hand in chat or raise your hand. And also those who listen to us on Facebook, you're more than welcome to put your comments, your questions in comments. So I will, of course, pass them to our speakers. Okay, while we don't have much questions at the moment, I have one question from people who registered to our webinar, and I believe this question fits well into the first section. So it is, what successful tools can be used to create an effective open government in Ukraine? What are the potential consequences of developing open government in Ukraine? Do we have any answers from the panelists?
I personally do think that our DIA is a good example of open government, because we have in that it's an app for mobile phone, yes, and you can use it to vote for different questionnaires, and the government use it to collect the opinion from the people about different things. And also you have there many different options about your taxes, about your data, about some I don't know, courts, for example, and etc., etc. And this is one of the tools that are used. And another tool about open government, I also think that our tender platform like Prozoro we use for public tenders is another example of a Ukrainian tool of open government, because all public finances should be spent only using this platform, and everyone can look what this or that city or village buy for the taxes people pay there, and also some governmental enterprises that produce some anything, yes, that is funded from governmental budget, is the money is spent also through this system. So I would name these two, like DIA and Prozoro are the examples of the tools of open government.
Many thanks, Georgi. What about informing people about governmental decisions? what about, let's say, mapping governmental information on some, let's say, online tools as well? Any other thoughts?
Indeed, if I may. I would start with a small personal example, and then abstract from this the sort of the message I would conclude as a general message. Thinking back to handling the car registration in Germany, and now recently prolonging the car registration in Slovenia. In Germany, there was an online website where I needed to make an appointment at the authority. Super strange to handle. Took me quite a long time to actually make the appointment, to then be able to go there and still sit there for quite a while to then actually be able to be handled then in person, and of course everything just paper-based. Last time now, prolongation of my car here in Slovenia, I logged in with my electronic identity that I got from the government for free with the electronic signature, this certification. I logged into the online system, took a look. My car registration is gonna expire in 4 weeks. 3 clicks and done. That's not saying that everything's working as smoothly in Slovenia. These thankfully did. But the point then is they did go so smoothly because of some things being provided. The first thing is really this kind of e-identity. So having provided a way to properly conduct business online, to have a signature online. This is something that a lot of countries do not properly provide. Slovenia thankfully does, and this opens up a lot of doors, including them safe and secure access to my own data at the administration. And this is then something that follows suit. And as said, some things are nicely implemented, others are still to come. But these kind of provisions, and particularly taking care of this electronic identity, that's an important part, and I think that's something that needs to be mirrored.
Yes, thanks, Sebastian. Indeed, open identities, yes, indeed, it's something very crucial for this. And do you have any comments on?
Yeah, maybe I can. I don't know. I will never say Ukrainian people you should do that or that. I don't know your country as you know it, and I will not say that. But I just can give some French examples I have in mind, which could be inspiring if any. So we have an initiative called France Connect, which is a centralized authentication system. So private and public organizations can use it to certify that when you connect to the system, you are a French citizen and you are this name with this unique ID and so on. So it connects the fiscal administration and many other administrations. You can they are interconnected with France Connect. We have one identification proving that you are yourself. You can have IDs there. You can order a new passport using this, and this is very useful. The second initiative I have in mind is a very old one, which is completely in line with open government process in France and not connected to science, which is Légifrance, which is an online database of all the laws in France. So you have all the law, all the decisions, all the codes and everything, which is there, public, and you have all the change after all the votes and things at the beginning. So we in France, we say no citizen should ignore the law. But the law is very complex and very difficult to access. As it is online, open access, you can read the law and you can know it much better than before. So this is 2 tools, one technical tool to identify for identification. The other one is another tool for having accurate, precise, and free information about the government. The same for the vote. When in the parliament, we know the presence of every MP, and we know if they were there, or what they voted, what they proposed, and so it's completely transparent. So the citizens and their representative are more connected. This is some examples.
Many thanks, Marian. Actually, dear all, I again encourage you to put your questions in the chat, both here in Zoom and on Facebook. And okay, let's move to the second question, which probably will be, okay, Anna Itzishin is quite active today, so it's a question from him to all speakers. Okay, so, but Anna, I don't think that peer review, okay, I think that this question can be moved to the end if we have time about open peer review, okay? Because mine has already answered, and we will also ask Sebastian to to answer later. But let's not forget that, for instance, Eurodoc is the expert partner is in Open Research Europe project, where open peer review is implemented like at full scale possible, right? But we will get back to this later. Thanks. Okay, so our next question is probably a crucial one, especially given the current difficult circumstances in Ukraine. So as open as possible, as close as necessary. It's a maxima approved by, and promoted by European Commission. So where is the red line in open government in general and in Ukraine? And also, we have a question from our colleague Eric from Brussels in the registration form, who is now present also. How can we balance openness with the growing array of security dilemmas connected to the geopolitical situation? So I suggest we combine these two questions, and you're more than welcome to answer them. So Marin, please, if you have any thoughts, please share with us.
Yeah, I would say that I started already the first question to answer to this question, but I will go a bit deeper. So we are not naive, and we should not. So you are in war, we have competition, there is also economic intelligence, which is dangerous. So what we have in France is a policy where the Ministry of Research and the Prime Minister defines a list of topics that are of security risks. So these topics, these disciplines, these thematics in research centers defines a list of zones, what we call restricted access zones. In fact, it's a place, but also a research topic, which is defined as too sensitive to be open. So we have defined a list of it. So the people in the research centers that are involved in such research know that they cannot make public their research without approval from the government. And that's completely fine. It's a national decision to say this topic, and this topic should not be open. For example, about different military risk or the research on some terrorist issues, many disciplines, not only in STEM, also in humanities and social sciences. We should not let the researcher alone deciding it should be open, it should be closed. We should help the researchers and the universities to know where the risk is.
Thanks, Marin. Please, Georgi.
We have the same list in Ukraine, yes, and we have like state secret and what information counts as a state secret, and you cannot like make any publications or somehow share the results. And there is special department at each university where they look how the scientists work, and they prevent any information go out from the university. But the problem we have here in Ukraine that we have only two main funders, like Ministry and National Research Foundation, and they possess themselves as the open and organizations. So they we don't have any special funding for some I will call it special researches from like military ministry or somewhere else. So those who wish to conduct some special researches, they do not have any specific department where they can apply for funding. So they have to somehow balance between openness and some specific researches. So maybe this is one of the points we have to work with our ministry to find some solutions for making research in military directions with specific funding, and not to show this in our main like science that is open. This is the idea.
Many sense, Georgi. Sebastian, any thoughts on this?
Ambivalent thoughts, to be honest. Some so, some so. That is, on the one hand side, obviously it's a good approach to really have the exclusion list that we heard before and the corresponding processes in place. That's something, yeah, that's also, of course, very much relating already to scientific practice, to get the connection again. Going down to the colleagues of the wood science and technology, most of the day I can just open the door and walk in the lab, no problem. With the other colleagues I'm collaborating with at the health science faculty, where they're working with bacteria and fungi and other infectious materials, I can't, for obvious reasons. So I think it's obvious that's the case. Not all these things might always be that obvious, though. For example, with some of the machinery that I see here at my department, that there are some things that are openly accessible. Others are put in a cage with a special lock. Both of them are simply just machines to process material, but one of them is moving so far and with so much distance that actually someone who's not familiar with this, and when a program is uploaded, they might kill themselves unknowingly. So risks might not always be as obvious. And so how to deal with this? Well, after the things that are understood and are obvious, or at least have been learned so far that are on the list, of course, there need to be procedures in place. And that's something that we also have already in science, of course, that for every laboratory, for example, you need to do the corresponding risk and safety analysis, which is never complete, of course, but it's a structured process that really helps you not so easily overlook something. I mean, in the very current situation, thinking about, for example, mobile telephones and the location data, that's an obvious thing, but wasn't to everyone as obvious. So yeah, this is something where structured process really helps to not overlook such kind of things that you might be aware of. And then in the very end, I think that the third part needs to be sort of a culture and a specific way of training these kind of fields. So in the same way that, for example, chemists are very, very diligently trained in laboratory safety, how to consider different substances, handle what not all. Not because all of them are deadly dangerous and these and that, but there's certain ways of like how to have a work culture in place that's beyond just a vetting procedure on specific occasions, but it's really a difference in how work is being performed. And I think that's the same thing that also will hold true to governance. How governance is performed, how governments work, is changing tremendously because of also all the technological advancements we have, because of all the societal advancements that we have. These are evolving more and more quickly. So one very good relation to this is this kind of generational terminology. In older times, it used to be like 20 years that there was a consistent cohort, that over 20 years, it's sort of a shared experience. This timeline has now cut down to only 5 years. So someone who's born now doesn't even understand the people 5 years after them. These kind of things are so much speeding up that needs to be an integral part of how administrations work, how governance works, how governments work, to just keep up with the pace, I think.
Thanks, Sebastian. Okay, let's then move to our third question. And I would also like to combine it with another one. So how openness in science and state administration can help nations survive crises such as wars, pandemics, climate change, and alike, right? No one knows what will happen, probably aliens. I will not be super surprised. But, and I would like to combine this with another question from our audience, right, from our participants. Is democracy necessary during war? That's very interesting, right? Could it be possible that authoritarianism, yes, that's probably a proper word in English, is more effective? What are your thoughts, dear colleagues? Mine, could you please share with us something?
I will not answer to the question of democracy. It's not my role. But even I strongly believe in democracy, even in difficult time. Just to say something. First, science is only science. So it contributes to the progress of humanity, but it's not able to do everything and to solve every crisis. And we know that during the COVID-19 pandemic, I say that the sharing of data has not been that much generalized than we hoped. So we know that there is a long way to do, only a long way to achieve the open science movement. But we know also that the vaccine for the COVID-19 has been quickly found because we have got the DNA from the disease very soon, thanks to open data. So it shows that it can help a lot. And concerning climate change, I would say that IPCC would not be IPCC without open science. So exactly as the Human Genome Project is a very huge initiative, which is open science before open science. So without the Human Genome Project, we would be far less advanced in medicine today. And I would end my talk with the example of the web itself, which has been invented in Lausanne with the French-Switzerland initiative that you're all aware of. And they invented the web and they decided to give it for free to the humanity. It comes from science and it changed everything. Of course, there are bad things coming from the web, but we are using it today. So it's in favor of peace and progress of knowledge and acceleration of science. So I would say that we have more to learn from openness than from a closed approach. And openness is definitively a good option for solving a human crisis.
Many thanks, Marius. We indeed see many examples of this, right? Especially in recent years. All right, but science is also only science, as you say. All right, but okay, Georgi, do you have any comments on this?
Yes, well, about the first part of the question, to my opinion, that when we talk about some like global problems, there is not only, as Marin said, science does not like science is a science, yes, and the approach how we handle with this problem is also based on the people's beliefs. Yes, and for example, if they think that something in our nature happens and they don't understand the reasons for this, yes, so they do not have any ideas how to handle with them. And in this case, like open science, as it can involve more people in the like scientific approach and make them understand that science help us to understand our world and make people more knowledgeable, this is a way it can help, because people would know that this happens because of these reasons. And in this way, like open science, the way that makes people more aware, it's good in the case of some global disasters, because people know why this happens and can prevent this by knowing the reasons of processes in nature. And about the second question, I think that the democracy is what we are fighting for. So to cancel it during the war means to retreat.
Thanks, Georgi. Actually, yes. I mean, very often during crisis, there is like an idea to have less of democracy, and of course there could not be democracy in the armed forces, for instance, right? Because it's armed forces. But overall in society, we need to understand that indeed that's another system, type of thinking, and I hope the democracy will be in the end more effective and will prove itself being more effective than any other system. Okay, Sebastian, do you have any thoughts on this?
As I already mentioned, I'm a German national, so of course I have quite some thoughts on this, or some strong opinions for myself. Being that, of course, with our history, it seems very obvious that abandoning democracy in times of crisis is not a good idea. Let's put it that nicely. As you already said, there's of course instances where crises require quick action. And it's not just the military. I mean, of course, I couldn't see the military taking a vote how they're going to react while the others are advancing. But it's the same in the private society, actually. I mean, for example, a vivid image could be the firefighters voting who's going to go into the burning house to save the people. And when they're done with their voting procedure, well, who knows how much is still left of the people in the house, right? So yes, of course, crises require quick action, and could do many more examples, but like that's operational level. That's not the governance level, and that's a difference. So of course, the operational level needs to be well established, needs to be with procedures in place such that you can react to crisis, but the governance level cannot be compromised by that. And that's again then something where I'm very happy with the more recent past about some things that before and I hadn't understood as much, I would say. Like the one realization for me personally was some 9 years ago, when there was this big refugee crisis with so many people coming on the routes from Africa. But where there were these particular waves of people migrating, and this was a big thing on the news and a big thing in the politics. And apart from many things that can be said, how they directed, good or not, or what the politicians did, but seeing what happened on the streets, seeing how some extremists really made their voice very loud and very clear, and even though they were not the majority, they would have had a tremendous impact on politics. So in that situation, I was, to be honest, very happy that politics and democracy has its pace, that it's not too fast, so that it's also not too fast taken over by any such events, by any quick emotions, but it has time for emotions to calm down. So yes, indeed, I think democracy, as we heard before, needs to be particularly conserved in times of crisis, and particularly is something that's worth to fight for in times of crisis.
Many thanks, Sebastian. Okay, dear colleagues, we are moving towards the end of our webinar, and probably it's a very good time for questions from our participants, and for those who are here in our Zoom meeting. It's a very good opportunity to raise your hands, probably for some questions, just put them in chat. And if you have any questions to particular speakers or to all of the speakers, you're more than welcome to do so.
May I add something?
Yes, sure, please.
Just for you to know that there was a question about, is there any research on how open science is implemented in a research organization? So this is called research on research, or research on open science. So as you know, France is a member of the G7, and we have a G7 Open Science Working Group in the G7 for 5 years now. I am a member of it. And we have discussed lengthily the question of research on research to help us to advance open science. So in the Sendai communique of the G7, there was a line about this topic, research on research to foster open science, because we started the open science journey 30 years ago, and we are not there yet. So that shows that it's a very complex process. And so we consider that asking researchers why we are going so slow, where we are failing, what is difficult in the research culture and research organization would help us to go further. It's exactly the same idea than IPCC for climate change. We needed a consensual approach of knowing everything on climate change. So we published 2 reports. So the first report is a report of the G7 Open Science Working Group. I put it in the chat about this topic. And France is proposing to create a new organization called Global Research Initiative on Open Science, GRIOS. And I give you the link to the report about this proposal. So it's an exact idea to rely on research approaches to know more about open science and to go further in open science. Otherwise, if we stay at this rate, in 30 years, we will not have achieved the open science journey. For example, in France, we have an increase of openness of our data of 1 or 2% a year. So it's too slow. So we need help from research.
Many thanks, Marian. Such a nice comment, and actually gives our today's discussion some like global dimension with these papers from G7 and everything. They actually very interesting angle, and thanks for sharing this. I wasn't aware of that. All right, dear colleagues, any questions to our panelists? No questions. All right, then probably some final thoughts. Please, Sebastian.
Maybe I can then follow up on what Marian has just said. So meta research or research on research is something I believe that's very needed, not just for open science, but in many ways. We see the development with the mental health. There's a lot of things with research careers. Also the whole sphere of the research assessment, where a lot of the principles are clear, but then the actual implementation, how this impacts in which local environment, is tremendously different. So there's a lot of aspects really where this kind of research is needed to actually then, rating this back, have functional governance processes also in science. So that's very much needed. I agree. That's I think a good thing that this is also expanding. And then to also add one thought on the earlier topic, as we had in the question in the chat, what about open peer review? This is going to be a very, very brief answer from my side, a very short one. Of course, there's not just one single flavor of open peer review. There's many different approaches and practices, so keeping that in mind. But opening up peer review, I think, is inevitable. It's a matter of evolvement. We used to have in the past scientific publications without any peer review. They were just sending things between each other. At some point, we found out that it's useful or necessary to have a quality assurance to make sure and filter out some issues. And we're now realizing that the closed peer review, with all the good arguments why it should be double blind and whatnot all, that these approaches actually do not work out as well as we had thought they would. And so I think going forward with how much we already know, I think it will be inevitable for publications that peer reviews are being more and more opened up. For other things, it will be remaining limited, like project proposals contain sensitive information, personal information. So there's going to be a limit to how much this can be opened up. But generally, the direction, I think, is inevitable.
Many thanks, Sebastian. Okay, Georgi, do you have any final comments on the matter?
Well, I can just state that yes, I support the opinions of our European colleagues, and also think that we are just starting the journey to open science in Ukraine, and I think that in our ministry and in this project Open4UA, we will try to do our best to implement the best practices and hopefully join the European family with the open science principle implemented in Ukraine.
Yeah, thanks for this discussion. Just very short comments from myself at the end. So from my perspective, probably one of the best connections of open science and open government is that, of course, if we treat open science as a science done right, why it is done right? Because it helps tremendously to make better decisions, right? And indeed, we, especially in Ukraine now, we need very good decisions to not only survive, but to proceed, to rebuild, and to become a member of like European family, full member of European family. So probably that is the main reason we need open science to make our decisions, our government decisions more effective. And short comment about peer review. Probably those colleagues who know me better know that I'm a huge like adept of open peer review, and we try to implement it in Ukraine. But I totally acknowledge all the shortcomings of open peer review and openness in this regard. And we are also very much aware of a French initiative called Peer Community In, which is quite good, quite important, and we collaborate with colleagues from Peer Community In, which is not quite open, by the way, but it is very effective. So we indeed need to investigate and combine everything. Dear colleagues, many thanks to our speakers and to all of you who joined us today. We encourage you to follow us on social media, follow our Open4UA project on social media, and stay tuned, because more interesting webinars are to come, more exciting outputs will be shared, and let's say that we look forward to collaborating with all of you. And if you have any questions, comments, anything you would like to share with us, you're more than welcome to reach me or my other colleagues from the project online, on social media, or wherever else. Many thanks. Have a nice and peaceful day wherever you are, and bye-bye. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, bye.
Thank you. Bye.